also,
Yeah.
Zeno, the beginning of Anastasius' reign, the Eastern Roman Empire is still partially bankrupt from the Carthage expedition.
Yes, in 268, yeah.
So
Sorry, 468.
that takes an extraordinary amount of time to pay that back, and it remains in the a sort of bogeyman in the politics of the court of Constantinople right into Justinian's reign. We have John the Cappadocian being like, "Are you sure you want to waste all this money on invading the Vandals?"
Yeah, exactly. They can't be that keen to just give money to the Persians, not for the sake of mutual protection, but literally to just pay off reparations to or tribute to allies, certainly. Because Zeno, I don't know enough about it, but Zeno's administration strikes me as being pretty. He deals with a lot of revolts, doesn't he?
He does. Well, some of them are quite serious. To go through them in brief, you have the usurpation of Basiliscus right at the beginning of his reign, which he then retakes the throne. There are two. There's a palace coup by Marcianus, which fails. You then have the rebellion of Leontius, which goes on for quite some time. And there was also another rebellion, Marcianus, as well, which doesn't really go anywhere. He's kind of an exile in the provinces, but is more of a troublemaker than anything. For quite a long time, Zeno is hamstrung by all these various rebellions, which last right up until quite near the end of his reign, for 88. And there's also the Ostrogoths under Theodoric Strabo and Theodoric the Amal, who he eventually manages to sort out. He kills Theodoric Strabo and gets Theodoric the Amal to invade the kingdom of Odoacer. But all of that kind of takes up most of his time.
The Gepids are a bit of an issue as well, aren't they? Because the Gepids, they're the ones who seem most responsible for the victory in the Battle of Nedau, where the sons of Attila are defeated by their own Germanic subjects. So I suppose he's got a lot on his plate, and he's an Isaurian, isn't he?
His real name is Terra Cosodisso or something barbarian. It takes the usefully simple name of Zeno.
In terms of Roman-Persian relations, as you guys have said earlier, you do get a decline in cordiality, you might call it, despite this sort of mutual defense pact that's sort of been going backwards and forwards since, the end of since the death of Shapur II, practically. Because this whole thing that we talked about a little while ago about how the nature of what is being paid and who's paying it and why it's being paid seems to crop up again, because I found that Leo I cancelled the gold payments into the Caucasus after he found out one of his generals was supposedly sending letters to Peraz, threatening, offering to hand over territory to him if he invaded. And then Zeno was the guy who resumed some of those defense payments to keep that mutual defense pact going, and that bailed out Peraz when he was captured the first time, or whatever it was. I think it's really fascinating how integral this that defense, sort of mutual defense agreement against the Huns is through this entire century, practically, and how it eventually seems to start being one of the things that drags the Sassanids down, whereas at the beginning it seemed to be something that they were sort of using, that sort of seemed to give them an upper hand.
It also seems like another a related element of that is this ongoing threat of Hunnic peoples, which we already see in the 390s. By the 480s, has reached a point where it's no longer a Hunnic threat. It's no longer the Hunnic threat. They've sort of lost. That changes the dynamic in a new way, because now Persia is no longer distracted and trying to, and has a common enemy that it can negotiate with the Romans over. it's now got, whether they recognize it as this or not, and probably they wouldn't recognize it this way, but they have an overlord. And that's an overlord they're going to have to break off, and they eventually they will in the 6th century, especially under Khosrau I. But it does mean that the enemy has to switch back west. It has to be Rome again in a way. He can't attack his father-in-law, who's already beaten the Persians multiple times.
I was going to actually bring that up. The fact that he has this relationship with as a father and son-in-law thing, that has to be very crucial in how this goes forward. How did that happen?
And it sort of is forced on them because Peroz Dukt, the daughter of Peroz, is captured after the battle where Peroz is killed. And so she is forcibly married to Kushnawar. And so it wasn't so much a marriage alliance as
I was going to say, if that had been a marriage alliance, somebody was brilliant at that.
Yeah.
Okay, this is again the conqueror for like getting himself some authentic Persian royal lineage, basically.
Yeah, making himself the king of kings, and notably his coins copy those of Peroz. They have the same crown. Certainly in the eyes of the Hephthalites, they are the new overlords in the Iranian world. And that must be a real... Al-Tabari describes that defeat as the worst defeat that Sasanian Persia ever suffered, which is an exaggeration when you look at the 7th century and you look at what happens with the Muslim invasions. But before that point, he may have a point, because that is a humiliating thing to have happened to them, that this marriage is... They have lost the princess. She is now a Heptalite queen, and it is also very geographically potent. It's ideologically a big deal, because something that isn't often appreciated about the Sasanians is that their sort of mythic frame of reference is very East-centric. Their myths with Rostam and these, Iranian heroes tend to be associated with Afghanistan and Eastern Iran, and the common enemy are Turanians, basically Turks and Huns. So the Romans figure very little in Persian myth-making. It does, I think, tell us something about, actually, from a Sasanian perspective, the importance of that part of the world, that for them, Afghanistan and Central Asia is a part of Erenshah. It is a part of Iran. Whereas when we look at the inscription of Shapur I, and he says that he's the king of kings of Iran and non-Iran is, Rome. It's the parts of Rome that he has conquered. It's the fun extra.
It's such a wonderfully kind of imperial way of putting it as well.
Yeah.
It's like, and whatever else is out there.
Yeah, it's so Irano-centric to be like,
I don't really care what is out there. I don't have time to learn your name.
Yeah, what's that province? We'll just call it non-Iran. It's just a part of non-Iran. It's fine.
That explains sort of the ending of the peace, or the road to the ending of the peace for the Persians, but also for the Eastern Roman Empire under Anastasius, and as you move into the 6th century. And I suppose this comes to another point of the benefits of this very long peace, is that I know there's a book, or several books, that have been written about the massive expansion of farming and economic growth in the Eastern Roman Empire. With cities growing larger, new towns, new villages, new farms being established in the eastern half of the empire. And then Anastasius I using that with his, as Warren Treadgold argues, with his reforming of the pay system of the army and how it equips itself, leaving it in a much even stronger than it was before. And then Anastasius has this sort of reformed Roman army. How is it reformed? Well, Warren Treadgold essentially argues that before, how the army was equipped was it would be requisitioned from the budget, that we need 10,000 shoes, etc., etc., and that would just be handed over to the military. Whereas Anastasius converted that into a sort of monetary budget for each soldier, where they would go away and buy their own equipment, which would allow them to get better quality stuff and make it, basically every soldier is their own purchaser. And so with this much stronger army, in terms of gear, he is able to utilize that against the Persians. Also, Anastasius has the benefit that none of the other emperors during the 5th century had, which was all of his other frontiers are largely quiet. Like the Balkans is still sort of a smouldering wreck by this point, but other from that, everything else is untouched. The Ostrogoths are gone. The Gepids appear every so often, but he has the wiggle room to actually prosecute a war in the east in 502, whereas Theodosius, Marcian, and the others, much harder to do. I mean, Theodosius, have to look back at 2 wars he had. The first one, he has this golden moment just before the death of Honorius, and just after, because he's become an adult by this point. All the troubles from Arcadius's reign are long gone. Honorius's empire in the west is starting to come back under control, but it's just before the civil war that happens in 423 to 425. So he has this moment to actually prosecute a war in the east, and it's a short one. And then in the 440s, as we said, he has to cut it short because of other troubles. And even though he is helping the West in Africa, it is essentially one unit, one army he's sent there, as opposed to the multiple armies he has to send against the Huns in the Balkans.
Yeah, so Anastasius is sort of uniquely positioned to actually fight a proper war against Kavad.
It also helps that Anastasius is a very business-minded emperor, and so it kind of helps transform the growing economic output of the Eastern Roman Empire into a monetary form, the introduction of the follis, which is a very interesting thing in itself, and not something I'll get into now. But
because what was his background? Why? I don't know enough about Anastasius.
So he was a bureaucrat, essentially.
Monophysite, yeah.
And he was appointed emperor by the Senate, essentially, and the people of Rome, of Constantinople, because Ariadne, who was the daughter of Leo I and the last member of the Leonid dynasty, they all agreed that they wanted another emperor who wasn't a filthy Isaurian, but was also a steady pair of hands, and they settled on Anastasius, and she married him, and then she eventually passed away. But essentially, he was brought into the dynasty
to balance the books.
Yes, and a sort of a politically neutral person to replace Zeno, who, in keeping his throne, had managed to annoy lots of people.
Anastasius is the fellow who decided to let the troops buy their own kit, yes?
Yes.
Right. That does sound like a very bureaucratic move. I don't think a general would have thought of that. I would love to know of the receipt, like the accountability system of that. Do you have to there must have been like rules and regulations as to you must buy something that will pass inspection. You can't just go and save money on this.
That war at the start of the 6th century, the Anastasian War, I was reading recently that the amount of Roman forces that get committed to that war had not been seen since Julian's invasion of Persia back in 363. So it really does show that the situation has reverted. It's back to where it was in a way, because he commits to sending all these generals, Ariabindus and all these other characters, Romanus, and perhaps it's not what Kavad was expecting, because I know that at the start of that war, he has to retreat briefly to get more men, because I guess he wasn't expecting the Romans to actually respond in such a major, organized, manpower heavy way. And I guess that sets the tone for the century to follow.
Yeah.
It's also really kind of fascinating when you bring up the fact of that sort of precedent of the Julian invasions as sort of the I don't know, the rhyming of history, if you want to use a Mark Twain kind of analogy, is how Rome's sort of push against aggression against Persia in sort of the early period from Julius Caesar, if you like, onwards through to Julian, ends quite badly for the Romans, and it sees the Sassanids rise to, their emperors rise to the peak of their powers by the 5th century. And then when the Romans sort of back off to deal with their own problems, the Sassanids sort of devolve into themselves. And so when the Romans come back, it's not quite the same sort of metal they're facing.
Sure.
I won't go into the 6th century because that's not what we're here to talk about. But just as a brief, it is interesting how in, shall we say, the later phase of their relations, Rome and Persia, the scale of these wars just keeps increasing. Like the length, the resources involved, and the commitment to winning by any means is kind of quite striking. But I want to move on to the final question before we wrap up, which is the great peace of the 5th century. To what extent was it more events, or the people, the emperors and kings of kings and the people around them responsible for this taking place? Was Theodosius II the master of diplomacy during the first half of the 5th century, or was it all about the Huns invading and the Hephlites and so forth? What do we think?
To bring it back to where we started, I think the three key things, in my opinion, are the Treaty of 363, the partition of Armenia in 387, and the fact that Huns become a factor. I think that Persia hasn't got as much reason to fight in the West as it had previously, because these territories that have been taken from the Parthians are no longer being contested. And while they did agree to partition Armenia, I suppose we haven't specified that, but it's worth bringing up that partition was, I think, 4/5 of Armenia went to the Persian side. So it wasn't a particularly even split. And so I suppose Persia just has a lot of reason, thinking of it from the Persian perspective, I don't think Persia has a lot of reason to fight all that, to start wars in the West. And I suppose that is coinciding, and they've also got this new developments in the East with the Huns in, Kidarites and Alcon Huns at first, but then later in the century Hephthalites, but of course that will change the dynamic eventually. This general sense of a mutual enemy, Hunnic enemy, even though it may well be the case that there was maybe not much contact at all between the Huns in Europe and the Huns over in, Bactria, that's pretty far away. But I suppose there's this sense that, well, they're all similar peoples, and they've all shown up, and at different times across the previous century. And I guess all that coincided with the fact that Rome is suddenly going through the gauntlet. Because I suppose that's a notable difference between the 3rd and the 5th centuries. The 3rd century, Persia is a core part of why Rome is going through the gauntlet. The 5th century, they're not. There's other reasons for it. But those are my thoughts on, I think it's sort of the circumstances have changed, in my opinion.
And I think credit should be given to the people behind these decisions, in that one factor, for quite long periods in the 5th century, you have very long reigns for both empires. So you have people like Yazdegerd I and Peroz and Bahram, who have very long reigns. Not quite as long as Shapur II, but long enough to have a consistent approach to various things, as is the same in the Eastern Roman Empire. So Theodosius II, who rules for 40 years, and then you have very long reigns of Leo I, who's there for 2 decades, and then Zeno similarly, and Marcion, is kind of this tail end of Theodosius. You have the ability to have very consistent policy, if you like, so approaches to foreign policy. Each person has their different approach to it. And also, there must be the understanding and desire to have a war. So, looking to the 6th century, you have Justin II, who there's lots of things he could do, but his number one priority is starting with Persia. The 5th century emperors decide to do that. And even though they could have done, there must have been decisions made by the emperors, or decisions not made by them, to and the Persian kings of kings to come to a consensus that fighting each other is not in their best interests. Whatever issues that had caused problems in the 4th century and 3rd centuries were not there during the 5th century. So it's only when you have new issues come about at the end of this period that you start having a spark up of conflict again. But it is important to consider the people behind peace.
In that vein, I think credit to Yazdegerd I, because as far as I think we can tell, he seems to be a pretty conciliatory ruler. And Arcadius as well, as much as Agathias hates the idea of it, making Yazdegerd the guardian of Theodosius II did work out well.
I mean, that seems to be one of 2 decisions he ever made as emperor. That's getting rid of Gainas.
It seems to me that it is in terms of personalities, it's the succession of emperors and shahenshahs that maintain that peace, that joint defense pact, so to speak, in the Caucasus, and at the same time, it is the fact that you now have a new element into sort of geopolitical strategy brought in by the Huns that typifies the 5th century realistically for the Romans and the Persians, because the Huns weren't something that they had to deal with seriously before, and now they are, and it does seem to inform a lot of what they do and how they do it. Another thing I'd noticed as well was in favor of the sort of more events-heavy side of things, was that whereas before the Persian empires had been quite proud of their somewhat pluralistic approach to religion, the Zoroastrian sort of clergy are now being very, very sort of reactionary, which is forcing the kings to not be necessarily be seen always as, if they're seen as protectors of all, they're enemies of Zoroastrianism, and it seems to cause them a lot of trouble.
And that may explain a little bit about the first war, where Theodosius, who, in much the same way as the protector of Christianity, if you like, kind of has to get involved to prevent persecutions. Because I think that is what Sozomen and Socrates talk a bit about.
Yeah, definitely that first war. Persecution was a part of it, certainly. That was part of the reason they felt they had to get involved. Which brings it back to Constantine's original reasoning for provoking things a bit with Shapur II, although I don't think Shapur II needed to be provoked.
Well, I think that just remains for me to say thank you very much, both of you, for coming on and talking about this fascinating topic, the triumph of peace in the 5th century between Rome and Persia. I'm sure we will have you both on again for more talks about the Persian and Roman wars. Thank you very much, both of you, for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you for inviting me and putting up with my my rank amateur takes on stuff.
But no, thank you both for coming on. Is there anything you would like to promote while you are here?
Nothing comes to mind, to be honest. Got articles. I've got a book out there, Dynastic Politics of the Age of Diocletian.
If any of your listeners is interested in 18th century AD conflict, then you can find the info all I've written so far on my website. One day I will have an ancient subject to my name, but it has not happened yet. So I will not be specific about this and ruin the immersion of the podcast.
Well, thank you very much. To close it in the timeless fashion, this has been Eastern Roman History.